SPG before we go?
Yeah, thanks SPG for the food in the building, and if you want to know what we do, come talk to me after. It's good company, and it's kind of why we invite you here, but it's not really why you're here, so I'm not going to mention it. And I said no on tape.
So I ended up not being able to do duplicate screens, so rather than actually playing the slides, I'm just going to leave it in this mode. Is that if anyone can't see it or whatever, I can try to blow it up, but just stop me. So this talk is going to be talking about how to audit an app, a web app, for accessibility. Some of these techniques can be applied to mobile, and we'll talk about mobile specifically a little bit, but here. Make that a little bit more explicit. So really I'm just going to start with an introduction to what is accessibility, why is it important, and then kind of move into a little bit more nuts and bolts. How do you make what you're working on, whether it's a side project or an enterprise app, more accessible, more usable for everybody. So just really quickly, a little bit about me. My name is Drew. I work at a company called MX down in Lehigh. We do fintech, data for better banking. So I'll touch on this in just a second, but if you are in higher education at all actually, finance or government work, if you're at inzen.gov, then accessibility, if you don't know, it's really, really important. Those are like the industries that are held to the highest standards, but more and more it's just becoming important kind of across the board, and most people would agree that it's going to continue on that way. So before I say it a few more times, what is accessibility? Generally, when someone says accessibility in regards to digital content or the web, what they mean is making your application, your website, your whatever, your content available to all people regardless of their ability or disability. So in a physical space, that would mean, like, if you notice when you walked in the building here, there was a ramp in addition to the stairs. That is like legally mandated by ADA that any space that's public place of business, I think is the wording, must be accessible to someone in a wheelchair. So kind of similarly, if there is a disability that prevents you from interacting with the web the way a lot of us are used to, it is our responsibility as developers to make that easier, make that accessible. So that's what accessibility is. So why is accessibility important? The most important reason is the moral reason. It's the right thing to do. The way I like to phrase it, and I've heard it phrased before, is we are all only temporarily able. At some point, we're going to get old, we're going to get hurt, we're going to get sick. You could sprain your ankle playing soccer, you could get in a car accident, like anything could happen to you, and you might enjoy all full abilities today, but that's going to run out for all of us at some point. So in the spirit of compassion and understanding, we want to make sure what we're doing is accessible to everyone, just as we would want it to be accessible to us, depending on our position. There's also a fiscal reason. If you like money and your users end up deriving money to you, then having more users means having more money. It is estimated that 1 in every 4 people in America has a disability. Upwards of 20 to 25% of people experience some form of disability. That's a pretty broad stroke, and we'll cover some of what that means in just a second. But that being said, if even 10% of people can't use your product, that's 10% of revenue that you're missing out on. So in addition to being the right thing to do, it's also the profitable thing to do. And then finally, and this is just kind of an example of how much there is to learn in this space and how many conflicting opinions there are. I like to do a little bit of fear mongering, and I generally have to convince people, as I'm sure any of you will if you decide to become an advocate for accessibility, like, why is this important? Why do we care? Blah, blah, blah. And a lot of times, really, the way I've found to be motivating for people is to show them big lawsuits. This Domino's here, I don't know if you guys saw in the news, their mobile app was inaccessible. A blind user was unable to order pizza with their app, and rather than just say, hey, we'd like to sell pizzas to blind people, they were like, no, we're taking this to the Supreme Court. Some of their arguments were it would cost us $3 million to make this app accessible, and I'll do it for $1 million if anybody knows anyone at Domino's. Also, talking about how the guidelines aren't very firm, which is true. The ADA, which I mentioned earlier, was came into being before the digital age. So the legal standard doesn't have very strict definitions when it comes to websites. There are other standards, but they're not like there's not the teeth for them. So anyways, these issues end up becoming legally arbitrated, whatever. So if you don't want to get sued, make your stuff accessible. I did learn today that typically if you're found guilty of violating these, damages are not awarded directly to the plaintiff, but you will be usually forced to pay attorney's fees. So right now, as we speak, I guarantee you there are attorneys out there that are just going to the top 100,000 visited sites on Google and trying to find one that is inaccessible so they can get their client and they can get their payday. So I saw a stat, and it was halfway through the year last year, but it was for every business hour there was a lawsuit currently in arbitration. Is that the right word? That's not the right word, but currently happening. So this is happening multiple times a day, a lot. So again, some people don't like because it's legal is not a compelling argument as because it's the right thing to do. But for me, I found it to be pretty effective, especially when talking to higher ups in companies and convincing them why it's important to make this a priority. So how do we ship accessible code? Ideally, you start with accessible design. That makes it so much easier if you are building from square one with accessibility in mind. And this is also usually the case where if something is better for a user with a disability, it will tend to be better for everyone. So some examples of this are like subtitles. Sure, if I can hear, I don't need subtitles, but sometimes, whether it's an accent or I have to pause it and come back in mid-sentence, having a subtitle makes it easier for me to understand. So that's one quick example, and there's a bunch where making it accessible for one subset of the population kind of makes it more usable and better for everyone. So another way is to get buy-in from product and management, threaten them with lawsuits, promise them more money if they're not moral people, which can be the case sometimes. That makes it really easy if you're at the bottom of the totem pole and you're the only accessibility advocate, you're going to constantly run into, sure, we'll get to that later. Yeah, once we secure this round of funding, we'll go back and make our stuff accessible. So if you can really get buy-in from everyone in the company from the get-go, it's going to make your life as the developer a lot easier. Kind of same thing here, build empathy company-wide. One of my favorite activities is to have a website, usually something very simple. I'll have 10 buttons, and when you refresh the page, it'll give you a number and you push that button. So the number 7 will come up, you click the 7th button, you win the game. And I'll say, I'll give you $20 if you can do this, and everyone will raise their hand and be like, okay, I want to do it. And then you turn the monitor off. And you're like, okay, figure out which button you need to push. And I'm waiting for someone to do that for me because I think I can handle it, but that's a great way to just kind of show really quickly. There's also some really fun plugins that you can install. I don't have an example ready, so I'm sorry about that, but you can Google it really, really easily. There's one that simulates Parkinson's or motor disabilities, where whenever you get on a button, it will just start randomly moving your mouse point. And there are some that simulate visual disabilities as well. It will either put things in grayscale for colorblind users, so make it really obvious when that green is the only thing telling you what to do, and then that green turns into gray. It's a lot less obvious. So again, there's a bunch of empathy building exercises you can do, and if you want suggestions, please talk to me. And as Brian said, feel free to stop me at any point. We're a pretty small group here, so I'm more than happy. I want everyone to walk away with something valuable. So if you need me to drill in or you just want to talk about something, let me know. So finally, finding resources is super duper valuable. A lot of people have been working in this field for a long time, and there's giant shoulders to stand on. Two that I depend on pretty heavily are the Utah Accessibility Slack group and then just the A11y Slack group. These are invite only, so if you are interested in, they're good for designers, they're good for developers, anyone that ever has a question like what is X about accessibility, you can get it answered in there. It's a great community. Also, just 3 quick examples. This accessibility developer guide has a bunch of stuff. I would love to share these links. I didn't see a comment section in the meetup, but I have a list of 10 links. So every page you're going to see, I can give you the link if you'd like it or try to post it somewhere. This is the W3C. WCAG, you can see here how to meet WCAG 2.0, customizable quick reference. So those standards are set by W3C. So anything that's w3.org tends to be a reliable resource. There's a lot of unreliable resources out there. It's either out of date or someone's opinion, and people have conflicting opinions. And a lot of this is interpretation of a standard. Again, these compliancy standards are not set in stone. They're up for interpretation. So finding a reliable source, really important. Similarly, I've found the MDN docs to be super helpful. This is ARIA. This is just a quick example. If you didn't know ARIA, Accessible Rich Internet, I forget. I bet this will tell us. Accessible Rich Internet Applications. There is a joke in the accessibility community. It's the first rule of ARIA is you don't use ARIA. So that, again, is one of those things. If you just Google, how do I fix this accessibility issue, you'll see an example. It'll just slap some ARIA rules on there. But these rules are deeply interrelated with each other. Like you can't use a radio button unless it's in a radio group. That's just a really quick example. So like the dependency of any of these individual roles probably comes with other rules that you might not see in your first bind. So try not to use ARIA. Sometimes you have to.
Is that baked into some of the bigger stuff like Bootstrap or Material? Their component libraries have that already?
I haven't looked at a Bootstrap component in a while. I know that as far as React is the framework that I use at work, a lot of the like Material UI will have props that will directly correspond to like an ARIA label that you can pass in. It will be a one-to-one to these elements, attributes. Yeah, so sometimes, not always. There are some great component libraries out there that don't consider accessibility whatsoever, and there are some that will have a one-to-one for every ARIA role that there is for every component that if you know it's there, you can take advantage of it. So I don't know specifically for Bootstrap. I think Material UI offers, but I'm not positive. So I would double check that. Okay, so some of you are probably thinking like, I'm not Greenfield, I don't have designer buy-in, I don't have the whole company empathy for accessibility. It's too late. This is like a sad face. And, you know, it is a sad face, but it's not too late. So, I like this. I'm just going to let it sit up here for a second, get a giggle. So if it is too late for you and you can't start from scratch with an accessibility for design and buy-in from the whole team and the QA process and all of that, what you're going to have to do is retrofit your app. And it's going to be terrible. This is 90% of what I do day in, day out. I have like an 8-year-old app, and accessibility became a priority for our company like less than a year ago. So we have a lot of code that is old, that is inaccessible. And fortunately, it's like good job security. It's an endless supply of to-dos, but trying to patchwork fix and bake accessibility into something that already exists and wasn't designed with accessibility in mind is very challenging. So that's what this talk is all about. How do we audit our existing apps for accessibility? How do we see where we land? Where do we know to start the work to try to make our products accessible? Just going to quickly check my notes to make sure I didn't miss any links. Nope. So a lot of this is going to revolve around an assistive technology. If I say AT, that means assistive technology around screen readers. If I say SR, that means screen reader. Sometimes I just use those acronyms. So screen readers are super duper important. They're kind of like the standard by which accessibility is judged. If a screen reader user can use your app, then typically it's in a good space. But as I was saying, there's a lot of disabilities that aren't necessarily visually related. So why would we focus on screen reader? Does that mean we're ignoring those other people? And the answer, fortunately, is no, because of the technologies of how the internet works and how screen readers work. It depends on things like being focusable for interactive elements, tab orders, semantic HTML, using headers to dictate what your page is supposed to look like, and all of these things are utilized by other technologies as well. So for example, if I can't use a mouse because I have a trimmer and I'm forced to use just keyboard navigation, if I can, I use keyboard navigation with a screen reader as well. So if I can navigate a site with a screen reader, then it's a pretty safe bet that a keyboard-only user will also be able to navigate your site. So this is mostly focused. You'll hear me talk a lot about screen readers, but it's important to understand this kind of encompasses most disabilities. The big exception is like audio, but really audio is just like have subtitles for any content with words, and then don't depend on a noise to trigger something, which we haven't really done in a while, like the alert doing or whatever that you hear. You don't actually come into that a whole lot of days. People like to handle their own alerts rather than using the default one. So other than those two things, your app's probably going to be accessible for everyone if it's accessible for screen reader users. So what is a screen reader user? This is actually really important and something that comes up a lot, and you just kind of generally hear people say when they talk about accessibility, like, well, screen reader users do X. And it's really important to remember that just as all of us probably approach consuming digital content a little bit differently, so do screen reader users. There's, first of all, several different types of screen readers and brands of screen readers, but also you can consider this. So person A is 25, they were born blind, they were born in the digital age, they had their hands on a smartphone when they were 13, they have grown with the technology, they know all of the shortcuts, all of the hotkeys, and they're very comfortable using a screen reader. Person B is maybe 80, your grandmother, her cataracts have just gotten bad enough that she can not really see well enough anymore, and to be honest, even when she could see, she could barely check her email. So these are both screen reader users, and they're both going to use the internet completely differently. So it's really important to know you can't lump everyone into one category, and for better or for worse, what's going to work for one user is not always going to work for the other. Check my notes here. Okay, so one thing that I based a lot of what I'm about to tell you off of is this screen reader strategy survey. So basically this is a blog post, and the person that wrote it asked 8 different screen reader users a number of questions and then recorded their responses. So you got one question, like when you arrive on a new unfamiliar page, what do you do first? So this kind of gives you several different perspectives on what, maybe it's actually 12 people, several different perspectives on how a user will approach landing on a web page, for example, with their screen reader, and what strategies they'll use. So between this blog post, which I read and love and highly recommend to anyone, and then also talking in some of the accessibility communities around here, we have blind users. There's a Utah chapter of the National Federation of the Blind, and I've been privileged enough to make some relationships with them, and the questions that I have for them have kind of bolstered some of these stories. So a lot of these strategies are coming directly from screen reader users themselves, which is always, like, of the resources I showed you earlier, I would throw all of those away in an instant for just my friend Michael, who's blind, because he's going to give me, straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, the best information. So just so you know, that's kind of where this is not a sighted user's opinion of how you should structure the internet. This is based on how I understand a blind user would access. So screen reader shortcuts. So basically the first, oh wait, no. I already kind of talked about the shortcuts. Like there are, okay, I'm gonna say some key button things like push the arrow key or push the space bar, or push the enter. All of this is customizable pretty much fully. Users can change any of these hotkeys, so don't necessarily expect like arrow key to be 100% accurate to every user. They might have mapped it to their mouse button or something. Like these are very customizable, so just don't take anything that I'm saying to be 100% true all the time. The button to perform the action may be different. The action should be there. Already talked about non-visual disabilities. Okay, so the first thing you want to do. Now, here's how to audit an app for accessibility. We're finally there. Step one is you want to navigate the DOM. The way a screen reader works is it'll take the HTML of a page and it will construct an accessibility tree based off of the HTML, reading the ARIA attributes and all of that, and it will be a top-to-bottom document that looks very much, I can actually show you. So meetup.com, if you inspect, over here, where is it? Maybe I can't show you? Oh no, it's here, sorry, accessibility. So this is the accessibility tree, and all of the elements that I can see in my elements inspector are going to show up the same way in this accessibility tree. So this is what your screen reader is interacting with when you're using your screen reader to navigate the DOM. And what I like to do is I start at the very top of the document and just work my way down. I think a common strategy is the first time I'm laying on a page, I don't know what's there. I don't want to just go from button to button because there may be something between the buttons that I need to understand the context. So I will first go through the entire document, top to bottom, and then I'll paint a picture for myself. What does this page have on it? What do I look for? And then on subsequent visits, they'll be like, okay, I know on my accounts page, I have 10 buttons and each of them is one of my bank accounts. So I can just go button to button, find what I'm looking for. But the first time, you'll get like the headings and the explainers of what the buttons do. So how do you navigate the DOM? I'm glad you asked. So the hotkey to enable voiceover is Command F5. You can see this little box pops up. It does have an audio component, but everything that it's reading is going to show up here. And I don't think I have great audio on this, so this is, pretend this is being spoken to you. I put mine on Australian accent. I think it's really great. Most of the time people will speed this up. If you look online for like examples of real screen reader users, they'll have their speed at like 250%. You can't even hear the words. It just has a particular pronunciation. So when it announces an element and it'll say header, they'll just hear like the huh and no, and like it's truly mind-blowing. And that's another great way to build empathy, is to just show a video of a user actually using the internet with these technologies. It's truly mind-blowing. Like I have mine at 150% and I can't hear it half the time. So I'm going to close my inspector because the focus gets trapped over there sometimes. But using the arrow keys, sorry. So now I'm at the top of my document, and this black bar is, I call it highlight. So there's focus, which if you're familiar with web development at all, like clicking on a button applies focus to the button, and it's signified with like a dotted line border. This black line is like a highlight. It is focus when it's on a focusable element, but it's not focus when it's just on text. So do it here. So like I said, I'll just push over and go element to element from the top of the DOM down to the bottom. You can see the text, reading, everything, whole paragraph, all of that. And basically what you're looking for as an auditor is, do I see anything that I don't hear? If it's there visually, it needs to be there, accessible to non-visual users as well. So that's kind of low-hanging fruit, super easy. If it's there's a number of different things that can cause it to be hidden from the accessibility tree and hidden from your screen reader. So that's the first place to check, is just, does everything show up?
So at this point, like the audio is coming out, it's reading that detailed paragraph if you're on that, like when you get to it, or does it read out like header or text box, or how is that?
Interact from the slider. Double tap and hold on the touch bar until you hear a rising tone, then scrub left or right.
Sorry.
Close button. Drew Warren is the front-end engineer and conference speaker. He will walk. Drew Warren is the front-end. Drew Warren is the heading visited. Link heading level 3. Attendees 15. You are currently on a heading level 3.
Sorry, this is... one word of advice, don't turn on your screen reader before you know how to turn it off. Everything gets like 10 times harder when this is on. So like, it's really tough for me to turn my volume up and down using my touch bar at the top here. But for
Drew Warren is the heading level 3. Attendees 15.
For
You are
certain
currently on a
elements,
heading level 3.
sorry. And again, this is all customizable. So if I wanted to say the element type after the content, I can do that. But kind of by default, for certain elements, it'll announce the element type. So like I was saying earlier, like the fact that it says heading first, then I know immediately without having to wait through whatever the content is, this is a heading. So if I'm not looking for a heading, I can just go to the next thing. But yeah, I mean,
Visited link.
This is
See
a
a
link.
link.
So
You are currently on a link. To click this
the link is
press
visited,
Control Option
so it says
Space.
visited, which is usually communicated by the link being purple rather than blue. It means it's been clicked. And then it says it's a link, and then it reads the content. And then for interactive elements, it will then have a second reading where it tells you how to interact. So for example, here, press space to click on the link. Sorry, let me turn.
F5 button. F5 button.
All right. This is so...
Voiceover off.
Okay. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool, cool. So, I'll show you one more. Get to... So obviously this is a Mac and this is an iPhone, so I can't really show you Android, or NVDA and JAWS are predominantly used on Windows operating systems. I'll tell you a little bit about them, but I'd like to show you. Let me just go to meetup.com. So in general settings, accessibility for an iPhone, you'll find Activate VoiceOver. There's also an accessibility tab that lets you triple tap your menu button to do some sort of option. So I have mine set up to triple tap my menu button to enable TalkBack VoiceOver. So same thing, except for instead of using arrow keys to navigate, you'll swipe. So I'm just swiping through a document. And then there's also this thing called the rotor, where if you twist, it will go by elements. So I can try to find form controls, which are like buttons and inputs. And then up and down will go, so left to right is just straight down the DOM. Up and down is element to element. So ideally, this is going from button to button. Button, button, button. So that's your first introduction for some of you, I'm sure, to screen readers, how they work, how to use them. There are cheat sheets out there. Again, highly recommend having, how do I at least turn this off before turning it on? Or it's kind of like changing your language to Chinese when you don't know Chinese and then you can't turn it back off. So quick warning, don't leap before you look. So for Android, it's roughly the same as VoiceOver. There's not a rotor, but there's other ways to pick which element you're looking for, and it's kind of the same left to right. goes through the DOM. Up and down will go through the elements. For NVDA and JAWS, there are like special buttons. I usually have them mapped to like my control key. And so up and down will, as usual, like scroll your page up and down, but control up and down will move the highlight of the screen reader. I would highly recommend this DQ, nope, not that one, this one, screen reader keyboard shortcuts and gesture. This has NVDA, JAWS, narrator, which I have no experience with. We don't support it at my job, but it's relatively popular. VoiceOver on Mac, TalkBack on Android, and you can see all sorts of fun stuff. These are, so double press a button is triple tap with VoiceOver on. There's 3-finger triple tap. There's like 4-finger swipes for next and previous. There's all sorts of shortcuts that you can use to get proficient with the screen reader, but really just the arrow key navigation and then the element navigation, which is just tab on a keyboard, or the up and down swipe like I showed you on a phone, will get you far enough to at least confirm, again, what you're looking for. Every element that I can see will get announced with my screen reader on. Turn that off. So secondly, after you've traversed the whole DOM, then you can switch to what I call tab navigation, or again, element navigation. So going back to the meetup page, turning back on my screen reader, you'll want to start at the top and just tab. So we've got the meetup button that goes first. I would expect start a new group to be next. So all of these things which are interactive are in what is called the tab order, and they have a tab index. Generally, you don't want to mess with that manually. Just give it a 0. You can programmatically decide by non-zero values if you wanted to come to share before going to my profile. I could set like 1, 2, 3, 4 on the tab index. Highly recommend you don't do that. People will expect it to just go in order. There's really no reason to manually override that I've ever run into. But here, what you're looking for similarly is there anything that does something that I can do with a mouse that I cannot do with a keyboard? And this is, again, not just for screen reader users, but there are plenty of keyboard-only users out there. And the only way to get to these interactive elements is through the tab button. And if it doesn't show up, then they can't click that button. And if that's vital to what you're doing, your site's inaccessible. So is everything clickable, tappable? That's my rule of thumb there. Finally, or sorry, not finally, there's 2 more after this. The functionality test. Can I do all the things? So there are oftentimes things in websites, and this is one of the things you have to fight with designers with. They'll see this super cool thing like, oh, if I just hovered my mouse over it, it like rolled over and showed me this information, like in a bio, like it was my face, but then when I hovered, it was my face and my name. Well, I can't hover with a keyboard, so I either need that to happen on focus, or there's got to be some way to do the thing with the keyboard, not with the mouse. And that kind of happens a lot. Like there's just parallax effects. Like if it's purely decorative, that's fine. Do the parallax, do the hover, like do whatever. But if there's information that's relevant there, it needs to be provided to your user regardless of their ability. And similarly, this is another one that I run into a lot. People like to ask, well, can we just put this information in an ARIA label so that only a screen reader user will hear it? So like if I get to my profile page, like obviously when I look at it, it's just my face and a little down caret. But maybe I put a label on there that's like, click this and all your wildest dreams and imaginations will come true. So just as you don't want to hide anything from a non-visual user on the visual content, you also can't really give any information to a screen reader user that's not somehow on the page. One of the reasons, at least that I've been told, is a combination of there are screen reader users that can see, Kind of going back to like the cataracts example, like if my eyes are just going bad enough that I can't read, but I can still see, like I'll see that there's not text here, and I'll wonder like, what are all these words that are coming at me? Like why did I, and sometimes people will actually hide elements off the screen, and so you'll focus something like between here and here and style it off the screen so that only a screen reader user would hit it and hear it, but it's not anywhere on the page, so people get confused like, where am I? What am I hearing? And then also cognitive issues for people that do have like a mental disability or something like that. It could be very, very confusing, or if they have like attention issues, it could be very confusing to have content that they're hearing but they're not seeing. So you really want to try to keep that in a one-to-one both ways. Next is the automated analysis. And people see this and they're like, whew, sweet, I don't have to learn anything because I have a robot to do it for me. So just real quickly, there's Axe, Lighthouse, Wave. There's actually like dozens of these. Most of them are built on top of, I think at the very bottom level, there's just 2, Axe and something else that I probably should have looked up before I started this talk, but I use Axe, so that's the one that I like. But like Lighthouse and Wave, I think are both built on Axe and utilize the APIs. They just kind of present it to you in a way they find more helpful. So you could just Google Axe plug in Chrome. Google Chrome. So I've already got this, so if you don't have it, it will say add to Chrome instead of remove from Chrome. But what this gives you, going back to our meetup site, is in my tabs here, you can see I have this Axe tool, and it brings up this sweet Axe tool with this analyze button. So let's just analyze meetup.com and see what's going on. So we found 44 issues here. They're highlighted by the type and by the number on the side. This one you're going to see on pretty much every page of the internet. It happens a lot. So when you click on one, it will tell you which rules you're breaking. This is the rule you're breaking. This is the element in question. This is the issue. And then this is a suggestion of how to fix it. And then I think if you go even further, there's like I know there's an inspect node. So this question button right here, basically, what does this button do? If I run into this button and I can't see that there's a question mark on it, what does the question mark tell me? So I'm assuming there's not. Sorry, this is blue, and it shouldn't be. Okay, that's cool. Okay, well, I can't show you what the button looks like. I'm assuming there's not an alt text on that button that tells you what it does because of the fact that Axe picked up on it. But anyways, this is a fantastic tool. This is always the last step in our development process at MX, is when we get an accessibility issue, we'll dev it human-wise, and then once we're finished, we'll run Axe to check for issues. There are, like, you can't always trust this. I wish I had remembered to bring it up, but I can't remember the URL. Someone actually made a site that has 100% pass rating on Axe, but is completely unusable to anyone. Like, it was like a thought experiment on how inaccessible can we make to prove that you can't trust these automated tools. I think I have the bookmark on my other computer, so sorry. Yeah, nope, don't have it. So for false positives, a lot of it will depend on your implementation. So at MX, all of our content is rendered in an iframe, and we just give that to our clients to embed however they want. So there's a rule that every site must have an H1 heading, and we don't put H1 elements in our content because we're always embedded in another site. So we're trusting that the client has an H1 somewhere, and therefore you're not supposed to have two. Like, that's another rule. You have to have one, but you can't have more than one. So we always get an alert that says you don't have any H1 elements. So we can ignore those. Some of the color contrast ones can be ignored because at the end of the day, this tool is only so good. It can't really detect images. So if you have like an image and then text on top of it, and you know that the text is a sufficient contrast over the image, but it's not over the background under the image, you'll get dinged. So you'll kind of just learn the false positives of that, but it is just important to remember this tool is great. It's going to help you a lot. Trust it, but always verify. False positives. And definitely check out, some of them have a really sweet UI. I like the Axe just because it's the basics and it's the same information that you get elsewhere, but some people really like the way it's displayed. They're like grouped together in different ways. A lot of these tools will say like, hey, you have 20 issues, but these 10 could be, like these 10 are for sure, but these 10 are maybe, so double check that. So highly recommend you check out all of this. So I already showed you the rotor. You can access it, let's see. Ooh, I'm going to forget left and up, there it is. So if I hold the left key and push the up arrow, it's going to bring up this rotor, and depending on which window I'm on, so when I go, you saw that here for Keynote, it's only got 6 options, but when I go to Chrome, it should have more options. So kind of depending on the application that you're on, you'll get different. So that's what I twisted on my phone. It's kind of the same thing. So this is really the last step. Phase 5 is the last phase. We're getting close to the end. So going back to that blog post, when people, a lot of screen reader users depend on buttons, headings, forms. That's all they're looking for. They're ignoring text. They're basically like, I know that in my change password field, I'm going to have a username field, a password field, and a submit button. So rather than like having to find out like your password must be 6 to 16 characters, blah blah, like all this other information, they're just saying skip all that, just give me the elements. So this comes, I wouldn't say it like, I would say this is an intermediate or expert level skill. You need an understanding of how a screen reader user is going to look for elements. But once you understand, like, I'm on this page, I'm looking for headings. If I have 4 headings on the page and I hit each one of them, is that going to be a good indicator for me? This is what you're looking for, and then go into that section based on that heading. So this one is, there's no concrete rules, it's kind of more feel, but it is going to be impossible if you have 0 headings, for example, and they get to a huge page with 6 different like widgets on it and a bunch of different content, and there's no heading whatsoever. Then they're like, okay, well, I guess I'll just navigate through the DOM. I guess I'm going to push tab 100 times before I get to the thing I'm looking for, because there's no way for me to skip through the content in logical chunks to see what I'm looking for. And then the hotkeys, again, I showed you guys the DQ. Yeah, there's a ton of these. I'll show you some of the Windows ones. So, like you can see, a lot of these are specifically how to find lists. L goes to the next list, I goes to the next list item, T is for table. So like a lot of these keys with the JAWS button, which again I map to Control T is going to take me to a table. So I know if I have something that's like, click here to see, again we do finances, click here to see a transactions table, then I know before I get to that page that I'm expecting a table to be there. So regardless of where my focus ends up when I get to the transactions table, I can just Control T and then I should be on the table. So that's a strategy that a screen reader will use to quickly get to where they want to be without having, you never want to have to tab through 100 things. I see it every day because a lot of our QAs like don't know all these shortcuts. So they're like, okay, I have to test this thing and it's the 30th thing on, so they're like refresh, tab, 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 tab. Okay, it didn't work this time. Refresh, like with this new thing. So it's actually really funny because you'll get into the habit. You'll be like, okay, I know I need to hit tab 8 times and then space, and then tab 3 times and then space. So like, okay, here, let me show you this thing. Like, you shouldn't do that. You should have a more sophisticated way to get through, which would more closely mirror the activities of your more sophisticated users. So that is all 5 phases. That's how you audit an app for accessibility. There are a couple of more that I'll just kind of breeze through. So expected key press behavior, typically spacebar or enter is going to be the same as a click. However, there are some caveats. Links, for example, don't work with space. They only work with enter. Radio buttons, this is the thing a lot of people don't know. Up and down arrows should select. So if you have like a list of pizza toppings and you want to select, well, pizza toppings is usually multi-select. Anyways, if you have several radio buttons and you can only click one of them, you don't, depending on the length of that, like you could have 30 options. And again, you don't want to have to tab through 25 to get to the option you're looking for. So what you'll do is you'll tab into the form or the radio group, and then your up and down arrows will select while you navigate. So that makes it slightly less of a pain in the ass. There's a sweet keyboard testing thing here. So this, again, link, only enter. Buttons, enter or spacebar. This is just a quick cheat sheet to let you know. This does come up a lot though and brings up an interesting point. A lot of times people will be like, well, when I see a radio, I'm used to tab and enter like I would with a mouse. And so I think it's a valid debate, and I think it's important to understand that rules don't necessarily always apply. Like there are bad practices, like ain't is not in the dictionary, but you will hear it every day. So just because the rules say you can't do something, when enough people do it anyways, it's going to become your expected behavior. So we do run into that often where we're like, okay, well the spec says it's supposed to behave this way, but every time we've seen this in the wild, it behaves this way. What do? I recommend, and as the accessibility specialist, I always say it is my position that we follow the spec, but you know, at the end of the day, I think your users are going to be able to figure out tab and space over arrow key. So it's really best to just ask the user. Focus trap. This is starting to drag on a little bit. Basically, if you have a modal, you shouldn't be able to tab out of the modal. That's just the expected behavior. But I think I have it on my gotchas as well, escaping the focus trap. So the DOM navigation, which is the arrow key versus the tab key, will always be able to escape the focus trap. I should probably... Okay, so a focus trap just ensures, if I have a pop-up that says, are you sure? And it says yes or no, then tab will only take me to yes or no. I can't get under the modal to the thing that triggered, like delete this, that triggered the yes or no. And so it's important, and it's in the spec here, modal dialog example. It's pretty long. All of these are very long, and I hope you don't have to spend too much time looking through these, but I do. Dictates that you can't escape a dialog, which is another word for modal, while it's open. So it's just important to know that DOM navigation, like just using the arrow keys or the left-right swipes, will get you out of the modal, but because it's different from focus, and that difference is subtle but kind of tremendous. I get a lot of issues where it's like, this text isn't announcing. It's like, well, text isn't interactive, so it doesn't have a tab index, so you can't tab to it. You have to navigate to it using your arrow keys. Or they'll say, I could get out of this focus trap when I'm not supposed to. It's like, well, your focus didn't leave the focus trap, but your highlight did. So the answer is don't use modals. Your design's probably not going to go for that. My designers don't. So just kind of be aware of this stuff. There are gotchas. Again, screen readers are customizable. Most of the stuff I've told you might not apply to 90% of your users if they've done any customizing to their stuff. Screen reader compatibility is the worst. If you've ever written some code in Chrome and then switched over to Internet Explorer and it didn't work and you were like, man, this is the worst, like, do that, but then also test it on JAWS and NVDA and VoiceOver and TalkBack for Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and Internet Explorer. Like it was my least favorite. Cross-browser compatibility was my least favorite aspect of development, and then I got into accessibility, and now it's like 10,000 times my least favorite, because not only do the browsers do things differently, but the screen readers do things differently. So it'll work with JAWS and Internet Explorer, but it won't work with JAWS and Chrome, and it causes weeks. You'll have an issue, and you'll be like, all right, knock this out in an hour, easy peasy. Works on the first 10 things you try, doesn't work on the 11th. Fix it on that, breaks on the 3rd. It's like, it's the worst. So, sorry. That's the best I can offer you, is prepare to despair. And then finally, last piece I want to leave you guys with, real users trump everything. Anything I've told you, if you're talking to a blind person that uses a screen reader all day, take their opinion over mine. Same with any blog post you're going to find. At the end of the day, compliance is not our goal. Like, sure, we don't want to get sued, but usability is our goal. We want our users to be able to use our apps. So we always tell our clients compliance is the bare minimum of what we offer. We will meet compliance, but we're going past that. And if there's ever a point where we think something is more usable or more intuitive, but it might be a little iffy on what WCAG 2.0 says, we're going to default to what we feel is more usable. And we think that position has allowed our software to be more accessible. And if push did come to shove, I personally believe, I'm not a lawyer, I personally believe that having a record of trying to make your app usable rather than just checking boxes on compliance is going to be the better strategy. So that's it, and that's all. Thank you guys for listening to me. Does anyone have any questions?
On the rotor.
Yes.
So when you twist it,
right?
Like on that presentation, it showed like the text and the button, so it only highlights those specific, like for the words, for instance, like it just highlights just the words on it, or?
Yeah, I'll show you the difference right here. So get inside this document. So left and right arrows, again, and this is customizable, are always going to go one at a time. So bullet point, button, header, end of list, all of that. When I switch to words, one of these, left and right are still going to do the same thing, but now up and down should, come on, control up and down? Oh, no, that's not it. Okay, well, wait, something just said demonstrates. Okay, date, picker, dialogue, example. So, yeah, sorry, it's still highlighting the whole link in the black outline, but if you look at the box, it's going dialogue, example, demonstrates, yeah. So it's two separate ways to navigate. There's traversing the whole DOM element by element, and then there's element specific, and the rotor controls which elements you target, and that's by default up and down for the elements, left and right for the whole DOM. You're welcome.
And you work primarily in React?
Correct.
So with that, how are you managing like front-end architecture with all of this kind of data and settings?
Sorry, how are you managing what kind of architecture?
Like just all these settings, like with the router, for example,
Uh-huh.
where are you putting all of these different settings for that? Is that within the app wherever you are, or do you have a separate like component holding all of that?
So real quickly, it's rotor, like a rotary phone. No, it's fine. It's very common, but it's important because routing is like a different thing. So the options that show up in this rotor, and I probably said router, are set in settings of my OS for Mac. So I go to general, accessibility, whatever, and it will have a quick box of what shows up in there. I would probably recommend you not have everything because there's a lot of random stuff here. So, sorry, I do want to talk about React, but I'm trying to answer your question first. As far as my website goes, it has no knowledge of the screen reader whatsoever. And there's actually something that comes up a lot where people are like, can't we just detect if someone's a screen reader user and show them this different thing, which is wrong for two reasons. One, it's like a separate but equal policy, and that should make you uncomfortable even just hearing that phrase. So that is one thing that I like to just immediately throw out, like, let's just go separate but equal and see how that sits with people. It usually doesn't sit well. Secondly, as a website owner, if I know that my client or my user, that the user client has a screen reader on, then I might know that my user is blind. And if they're ordering something from me and giving me their address to ship it to them, then I now have the address of someone who I know is blind. So there is like a security aspect where it's unsafe to give this information up. I didn't go into it, there's this screen reader survey. This thing is awesome. So if you don't click on a single link that I send you, click on this one. One of the best things here I'll find is like most popular screen readers commonly used. So this tells you NVDA is free, works great with Firefox, really popular. JAWS is like $1,000 a month if you're not blind. I think if you are blind, they give it to you for free. So we have to pay $1,000 a month on it to dev on it, which is great for JAWS, but whatever. So this is awesome. There's all sorts of awesome stuff in here, but they specifically have a question. Screen reader detection. How comfortable would you be with allowing websites and owners to detect whether you're using it? You see quite a few are very comfortable. They're like, if it's going to give me a better experience, then sure, tell them. Like, I'm not concerned about the security. Like, maybe they don't understand, maybe they do, and they're just okay with it. It's worth it for the better experience. This is like how Facebook and Google work. Like, you actually give up a ton when you use their free sites, but you do it because it's worth it for you. It's like, Google's really easy to use. All my friends are on Facebook, so take my data, take my privacy, take whatever you want. It's worth it because I love Facebook. Sorry, that got a little political. I hate Facebook. So anyways, plenty of people are not comfortable with this. They don't want you to know, and it's kind of for that reason. So React, without taking too much time, just super quickly, anytime you're directly manipulating the DOM like React does all day long, like takes an HTML element, removes it, puts it back on, you're going to get really weird screen reader behaviors. If I have a highlight around a button and that button disappears because React has rendered a new component, the highlight will kind of sit there, the focus will get lost. So we use React. It's a nightmare. Managing focus becomes something you have to do more manually and more deliberately. When you open a thing, it's like you gotta, on component and mount, or depending on how you're implementing, you've got to focus an element somewhere so that it doesn't go back to the top of the DOM. So React does have like a ton of accessibility specific stuff that you need to learn and use. But as far as the screen reader itself is like really concerned, they're kind of completely separate. Like, the screen reader comes from the OS. The browser doesn't know whether the screen reader's on or not. It's just the HTML that turns into that accessibility tree that I showed you. So React is responsible for all that, but it doesn't keep track of whether you're looking for buttons or links or anything like that. That's all on the OS. Yeah. Long question, long answer for a short question, but.
Going off of that though, is there any other technical security issues that are kind of unique to think through for instance?
Well, this is all announced verbally. So like, if I'm using my name app from MX and I'm on the train and I have my screen reader on, and it'll be like, total balance is not very high for me, but maybe for someone else, $1 million, then that's sketchy. So yeah, you definitely don't want to be just like blasting out potentially sensitive information without like first warning the user, like, click on this will say your account balance, so maybe put your earphones in, something like that. As far as from like a hacking hackerman standpoint, there's not a lot that I can think of that would be any different. A lot of the same, but nothing's coming to mind that's like, if you're making an accessibility site, you need to be careful about this specific security concern, because again, it's kind of just on top. If you have a secure site, it'll be secure with your screen reader unless it's announcing information that's sensitive. So.
So I've seen a lot of like spams with roll-up buttons.
Mhm.
Like
Sure.
how does screen readers handle that? Such was issues. That all gets messed up.
Super messed up, yeah. So I have another presentation that I like to do, and it's building a button from scratch, the case for semantic HTML, and the 30-second version of it is I start with a div, I put an on-click on the div because if it's a button, you got to do something when you click it, but you can't tab to it. I add a tab index to it. There's 4 things. Tab index. I said 30 seconds, so I'm going to skip. There's 4 things you got to do. Sorry, well, whatever. They're not coming straight to my mind. Anyways, if you just use a button, you get all of them out of the box for free. You don't have to manually apply any of it. If you are using a div, or like 100 divs because you love divs and everything's a div, then you will need to specify all sorts of extra roll of button, on-click handler, on-key press handler, and a tab index. That is how you turn a div into a button that a screen reader can't tell the difference between, or you can just use a button. And I have a shirt that says, Aria, sure you want to use a div for that. And that's a good, fun shirt. So you shouldn't use divs. Semantic HTML is the way to go.
Like that's the most kind of stuff like I see drop down where somebody's done something fancy and I can't scroll through the keyboard.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're called widgets. Basically, anything that's not just like a semantic HTML. So, like a type ahead is like a widget. Even though like everybody has a type ahead now, there's not a type ahead semantic component. So you have an input that you give the type ahead or autocomplete behavior to. So anything that kind of has custom functionality is just called a widget in the spec. So for these widgets like weird accordions or carousels or drop downs or anything like that, like unfortunately they've become really popular and everyone loves them. They're like, oh, I saw this on Yelp and now I want to be as popular as Yelp, so do a carousel. They have their own rules, and basically the rules are the wild, wild west. You can do whatever you want. You can hijack key, like you just have to tell the user. So I'm like, if you open this date picker, all of a sudden up and down aren't going to do what you think they are. I'm going to intercept your up and down, and instead they're going to change the month and the date. So like you have the flexibility to do that and be compliant, and people abuse the heck out of that. Ideally, there's a way to do it that is just using semantic HTML, but again, I live in the real world. I talk to designers every day. I like websites that look and feel cool and modern and all that stuff. So we have a date picker. It is my nemesis. I have been in that component so many times, and it sucks. But yeah, the list of things that have a semantic role is pretty short. And the list of things that list of widgets that people put on their sites is pretty long and extensive. So fortunately, you have the freedom and flexibility to implement your carousels and your date pickers and your type aheads and all that. Unfortunately, there's no standard. It's like, try to talk your designer out of it if you can, but you probably can't. So.
You mentioned at the beginning that education, finance, government websites have like held to exact standards,
right?
Very high standards. Are
Right.
there like tiers of it, or sort of expected levels of compliance?
Yeah. So in the ADA, which the WCAG, which I probably should have double-checked what that meant, accessibility guidelines, web consortium. Anyways, in the ADA specifically, there's language like public space or reasonable expectation. There's kind of stuff like that. Like if it's a reasonable expectation that someone's going to enter this building, there must be a ramp if the only other way to get there is stairs. So people will apply those same standards. So like if I have an internal tool that only employees of my company use and I don't employ any blind individuals, I'm never going to get popped for an inaccessible internal only tool that is not public facing, that you must have credentials to enter. You know, like it is not reasonable to expect that anyone from the public would end up there. That being said, like a Shopify site or, you know, like any, if I give you a business card and it's got drewwarren.com on it, that's a glass blower in North Carolina. I wish I had that domain. Anyway, yeah, like there are levels for sure, and I think the reason that government, education, and finance are kind of held to a higher standard is because they're like really easy targets. Financial institutions tend to have a lot of money. The government is very public, open-facing. It's really easy to kind of get in front of the Supreme. Like if I'm suing you because you sell crocheted baby hats, the Supreme Court's maybe not interested in that. If I'm suing you because I need my unemployment benefits and I can't get them because your site's inaccessible, like I guess it's more taken more seriously. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what the criteria are, but specifically those are like the highest targeted sites. So that's kind of why there's more precedent for what you must comply with versus just like your portfolio site or whatever. So yeah, the shortest answer is yes, there are different levels.
I work in the federal government, and all of our websites we have to comply with like certain elements of Section 508 or there are more strict than for like the general individual, but it's only if it's embedded in the page.
So if your website was just a bunch of links, then like you'd be fine. Any of those links could be broken, but yeah. That makes perfect sense. Cool. Anybody else?
I recently ran into color contrast issue with like a data visualization we wanted to make available on our website.
Yeah.
We didn't really know how to approve it though. I heard that there were like contrast checkers, or is that kind of the same thing as like that?
So these are actually built into somewhere. Okay, sorry. I thought this was going to be super easy. There, somewhere in here, somewhere in Chrome DevTools is built in. You can compare to. Why? I wish I remembered to double check how to do this, but I don't want to sit here and trip over myself. I don't think so. Yeah, it's not there.
Okay.
Yeah, tons of contrast checkers out there, plenty of tools. There are some, you can give them a range of colors. Adobe is developing one right now called, oh man, it was right there. I just lost it. It's really cool. It gives you a three-dimensional representation of color based on different scales. So there's like hue and brightness and saturation, and you can just plug in like, this is my, a lot of design systems will have like a green, light green, medium green, dark green, whatever, and you can like plug in your whole rainbow and it'll just, it's like, there's a ton of tools out there that will tell you the contrast. There's one built in the browser, I just can't find it right now. The rules tend to be 3.0 for anything that's like big or not text, 4.5 for smaller text. That's the contrast ratio itself. So if that 3.0 number doesn't make sense to you, I'm not great at explaining things on the fly, but Google contrast, I guess. Anyways, for data visualization, which is something we run into a lot of our tools are, this is how much money you have, this is how much you've been spending, here's a pie chart, here's a line graph. The easiest way, there's two really easy ways to get around it. One, a lot of places will just have bars only. And if you just have bars and there's no, like, you just know because this one's red and this one's green, that like this bar's good and this bar's bad, put the number there too. So like basically include the information so that if I were to cover up the bars, I would still see the data that conveys the meaning. Alternatively, what we often do, my grandmother's calling me, is we'll provide a table view side by side. So we'll have a bar graph and it will be inaccessible. It either won't meet color contrast or it won't have, like, it'll use color to convey meaning that's not there with numbers, but then next to it we'll have a very boring table that's just numbers and words. So that is a strategy that we've employed. That was a battle that we had to fight with our designers and get to, but it's kind of the best of both worlds. They get to make inaccessible charts that look great, and we get to be compliant because we have all the information on the screen. But specifically for most charts, if you, like you can see here on the pie chart, they put the number. So like if I was colorblind and all I had was just this circle, I would be like, oh, this is like a gray and a gray, what's going on here? But because the numbers are on there, then it doesn't matter if you can't see red or green, you can see 46% and 59.4%. Except they don't, yeah, they should put the yes here, with the no there. Shame on you, WebIn. WebIn's usually really good, so.
Depending on your visualization tool, a lot of them do have color options like embedded within it to look at red, green color blindness, or on like a sliding scale when you can go in and adjust that light so you don't have the default ones. So it just depends on what visualization tool you have, but a lot of them are starting to do that as well.
Which also is really hard to consider everything. Like, it cuts out everything. Right.
So in the end, just don't rely on it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like,
one of the questions you were talking about, like, brightness and hues, but when it comes to a monitor, I mean, that's one of the things that's always really hard when you're trying to design different colors anyway. So many of the neutrals grades get lost if your monitor's just not bright.
Not 4K, yeah, or bright, yeah. And a lot of times, like, if you have the sun behind you,
Yeah.
stuff just disappears. Yeah, so.
Is that something to consider also, or is that just
I think the rule of thumb in like where these 3.0 and 4.5 come from are to say, like, if you have sufficient contrast for this, it should work for that. And these are actually really like the designer of our new design system. His name's Brian. Color is his least favorite thing in the world right now. You can't use yellow. Like, you can't use yellow at all. Like, you can't use yellow on white. You can't use yellow on black. Like, he's had to go away from yellow. And how do you convey, like, people are used to the stoplight. Green means go, red means stop, yellow means slow down. Like, how do I convey yellow without yellow? It's a really, really tough problem, and I sympathize completely for designers that have to do that. But to specifically answer your question, ideally, if you have the 4.5, even with low brightness or like a lot of times these grades, especially like even like I'm sorry for using this color scale here. Like, I doubt this is 4.5. Like, I have my brightness down a little bit to save my battery, and I can barely read my slide. And you'll see that gray on black is super popular. It's so hot right now. It's terrible. Like, you don't want that. But if you did have 4.5, then even with low brightness, glare, blindness, like whatever, like that is kind of where they've drawn the line that says, like, this should be good enough to read in these different instances.
That made me think about like parts of automatic changing parts of it. Granted, I've never made any of them, so I don't know all the different I'm doing, but if that's not something that is set by our system, but it's just like turn it dark. I mean, I know they would want to have a color scheme for the work, but like that's automatic.
And there's OS stuff for like high contrast mode, which I had never seen before until one of our banks was like, this disappears in high contrast mode. I was like, what's high contrast mode? So, yeah, it's the good news is, like I said earlier, high job security, accessibility work is never done. The bad news is it's never, like, you're never going to hit that bar and be like, all right, we're done. This is accessible. Like, these standards change, the interpretations change. What the tools change, so yeah, you're gonna think you've got it, and then someone's gonna be like, well, in this case, your thing disappears and I can't read it. I'm like, oh well, throw it to design. I don't know. Oh no, you have a tough job. Well, yeah, you figure it out, and then you let me know. I'll build it. Cool. Yeah.